Welcome to this episode of Unraveling Adoption, an intentional space to delve into adoption's complexities together. I'm Beth Syverson, an adoptive mom of a talented and wise 20-year-old son, Joe, who is launching into adulthood. I'm walking beside him while working on my own personal growth and healing, and I'm also a certified coach helping primarily adoptive parents. Joe and I are committed to helping anyone impacted by adoption, and we want to help the general public understand adoption's complexities better too. Have you ever heard of the forced disappearances in Central and South America? Well, today's guest, Nelson de Witt, otherwise known as Nelson Roberto, will help us understand what forced disappearances are, what's behind them, and how disappearances impact families. Nelson was separated from his birth family during El Salvador's Civil War and was reunited with them in 1997 at the age of 16. He is one of El Salvador's disappeared children. His story is harrowing and hopeful, mysterious and courageous. Open your heart to hear from one of the desaparecidos who was born in the middle of political strife and corrupt dealings and who is now raising awareness of the forced disappearances. Thank you very much for being on Unraveling Adoption to share your story, Nelson. I'm happy to have you here.
It's a pleasure to be here.
This is such an important topic, and I think people like me, I admit, I am very ignorant about this particular part of history and culture and tragedy, and I think your story is very important, and I'm grateful that you're willing to come share your story because I know it must be hard to do. I'm sure after you're done talking today, you're going to need a nap or something.
Yeah.
I'm sure it takes a lot out of you. So why don't you just tell us about growing up in your adoptive family? How old were you when you were adopted? And I know everything changed when you were 16. So pretend you aren't 16 yet. What do you know so far?
Well, first, I grew up in the Boston area. Both my adoptive parents worked in academia. And I grew up knowing that I was adopted, both because I could see that I looked different from my parents, but also they were very open with me and always told me that I was adopted. They shared what little that they knew about my adoption. And it was always very clear that there was some mystery around my adoption at a very early age.
Okay.
And that there were things that they could not tell me, not because they didn't want to, but because they simply did not know.
They just didn't know. Okay.
Yeah.
So you could tell there was something bigger than you in this whole situation. You could feel there was some kind of cloud hanging over you, but you just didn't know what it was.
Correct. Yeah. And neither did my adoptive parents, really.
Okay. And from what you've told me, they sound very open and willing to help in any way they can. It sounds like they did their due diligence.
Yeah, I think they were very supportive as much as they could be. So I was adopted in 1983, and I grew up in the 80s and the 90s, and we didn't really have the same resources that we do now.
No internet.
Yeah, no internet. You know, I know one of your other guests ran a camp for adoptees, and we didn't have those things.
Yeah.
I think my parents did an okay job to the best that they could have. I think they did try to introduce me to other adoptees and some play groups or something like that. But I didn't have a lot of exposure to Latin culture. And so it was hard to sort of connect back to that area of the world.
Yeah.
I was fortunate that in middle school and high school, I attended a fairly diverse school with a wide range of people. And I got to meet other Latinos from Guatemala, from Dominican Republic, and like I went to school with them. So that was sort of the beginning of my introduction to that culture.
Okay, good. Well, it sounds like everyone did the best they could at the time. And of course, looking back, everyone could think of things they could do better. But it sounds like you had a pretty decent childhood under the circumstances. And you thought you were from Honduras, right? Your parents adopted you from Honduras. And so you were growing up, probably did reports on Honduras in fourth grade or whatever, you know, you just like identified as a Honduran. What did you find out at 16? What was this news that you heard?
So it was August of 1997 when my brother and I had just left for summer camp, I think the day or two before.
Okay.
My adoptive father was at home and he got this phone call totally out of the blue. And the man on the other end of the line was calling from Physicians for Human Rights, the organization which he worked. And he was calling on behalf of a Salvadoran NGO called Pro Búsqueda. And Prouska's mission was to help reunite families that had been separated during the Civil War in El Salvador.
Okay.
So this man explains that in 1981, an infant, the son of revolutionary guerrillas, went missing in a police raid in Honduras, and that he believed I was that missing child.
Whoa. I just got goosebumps.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot. And so, obviously my father was in shock, and he was thinking, who is this person? Was there something wrong with the adoption? And started to probably get a little worried.
Yeah.
And the man on the other end, whose name was Dr. Robert Kirshner, he explained, I'm not here to break up your family, but I have this dossier that has an investigative report, and we'd like to send it to you and just look at it. And if you're willing to take a DNA test, then we can confirm this remarkable story.
Okay. So if you, the 16-year-old, would be willing to take the DNA test. Okay. If I were your dad, I would have been like, okay, my kid's at camp. I have a few days to figure this out. Do I tell him? Do I not tell him? Did they think about not telling you? Or this seems like a huge chunk to give to your kid at 16. Oof.
Yeah. So it was sort of fortunate that our summer camp ran for a month.
Oh, good.
So they had a good chunk of time to sit with this information. But Dr. Robert Kirshner sent them the investigative report. And as they were reading it, my mother recalls that things clicked, dates and people. And it was looking at the photos that came with that report as well. It just felt right in a way. Like it was just obvious that this is me.
Oh, okay.
This is where I came from. Especially because when I was adopted, they had been told that there were these sort of traumatic circumstances that led to my being an orphan and then adopted. So it sort of lined up.
Okay.
Now, they sat with this information for a month. They did see me in visiting day, but that's not really something you want to bring up during visiting hours.
No.
And I guess they did have people, close staff members or whoever, that were telling them, you shouldn't tell them, because it was, the information in the report was really difficult. And so they were being advised, maybe don't tell him, or maybe wait for a little bit.
Okay.
However, my parents chose to tell me when my brother and I should mention that my younger brother is the product of my adoptive parents. He's 4 years younger than I am, and we grew up together.
Okay.
So when my brother and I come home from summer camp, our parents sit us down at the dining room table and they break the news that we found Nelson's biological family.
Wow. And so not only did you find them, but you found some really intense news. Can you give us a brief overview of what you found out at that day?
Yeah. So the report outlined that both my parents had been revolutionaries in the Civil War in El Salvador, and that I had gone with my mother to Honduras, where, as sort of part of the revolution, a group of 11 or 12 guerrillas had kidnapped a businessman.
Wow.
And were holding him for ransom. And that is sort of the way that the revolution was funded at that time.
Ah, wow.
And we were there for maybe a couple months before the Honduran government police found out. They stormed the house and raided the safe house, killing pretty much everyone there.
Wow.
I was found in a back room, and the police, not knowing where I came from or if I had been taken to make it look like a family, they put me in an orphanage, and I was there for about a year before being adopted to the United States.
I wonder if they thought that you were like a shield, like, oh, don't kill us, we have this little baby, but it didn't work that way.
Yeah, that was sort of one of the theories, is that one of the reasons they put me up for adoption is they thought that maybe I had been kidnapped to make it look like a family on the outside.
Ah, got it. But it was your mother that was with you.
It was, yeah.
So we weren't kidnapped. And your father, I know you reunited with your father, so he was not with your mother at that raid. Was he aware that she took you, or how did that all happen?
Yeah, so as part of the revolution, they kept married couples separate. Because if one is captured, then there's a risk that the other would give up the other person. So my biological parents were married in a civil ceremony and then a ceremony at arms when they were sort of right out of high school, sort of college age.
Okay.
And they had my older sister and older brother before me.
Mm-hmm.
And then as the war escalated, my maternal grandmother took my brother and sister to Costa Rica, which was a lot more stable,
Okay.
sort of away from the violence. I was born after that in El Salvador. And on the day of my birth, or around that, a picture of my birth mother appeared in the newspapers in El Salvador, labeling her as a wanted terrorist.
Whoa.
So that was the impetus for her to flee the country.
To flee, yeah. Okay, wow. Whew. How do you reconcile that your mother was, well, they're calling her a terrorist. She would probably call herself a freedom fighter, right? Is that, I'm not very good about Central American history, but I have the feeling that she was on the good side. I don't know is there a good and bad side on this? I'm sure it's very complex.
Yeah, I mean, it is. It's very complex. The broad strokes history of the conflict in Central America is that you had a very repressive militant government that was violently suppressing labor rights activists, student protesters. They would protest in the streets and were basically gunned down.
Wow.
So there weren't a lot of avenues for people entering college age, entering the workforce to really get any mobility. And I think it's important to say that they did try peaceful demonstrations. They did try voting, but there weren't a lot of options.
Yeah.
And so as a sort of last resort, people in the country started picking up arms to fight back.
Yeah. Wow. I can't even imagine what that must have been like for someone like your mother with a little baby and 2 other little kids in a different country and literally fighting for her life and her family's life and the country's life. That just must have been such. And she was young when she died, in her early 20s, I think you said?
Yes, 25 or 26, I think.
Gosh, I can't even imagine. I don't know what I was doing at 25, but it certainly wasn't existential bearing our, like, that's just unreal. I can't even imagine. How does that feel? That is your story. It sounds like a movie or
pretty overwhelming.
Yeah, for this kid from Boston, just trying to imagine being 16 and hearing this.
Right. Yeah. And then after the discovery packet came, I agreed to take the DNA test.
Okay.
And we flew down and we met 30 to 40 of my family members in Costa Rica for the first time.
Okay. So your dad and your siblings.
It was this movie thing. We walk out of the airport and I see my father walking towards me and we hug for the first time in either of our lives. And for me, it's blank after that. The emotions were so intense that I have this 30, 40-minute window where I don't remember anything. Like it's just, so overwhelming. And it was this sort of movie fairy tale sort of ending. But of course, life goes on, right? And then you have to wrestle with the fallout of all of this stuff.
Yeah.
And I think it weighed heavy on me, and it still does to some extent.
I'm sure.
The magnitude and sort of scope of all of that, and wrapping your head around the history and what happened and why, and all these really big questions that I've wrestled with since I was 16.
Yeah, I don't doubt it. Now, you are one of the disappeared or desaparecidos, if I hope I'm saying that sort of right.
Yeah.
Tell us what that means. Kind of give us a little lesson.
Okay, so the term disappeared isn't something that we're really familiar with here in the United States, but it sort of has its origin in the former president of Argentina, Jorge Vidal, who, when pressed about the whereabouts of a missing person in his country, he said, as long as he is missing, he cannot have any special treatment. He is an unknown. He doesn't have an identity. He does not exist. Neither dead nor alive, he has disappeared.
And this is a person who literally disappeared people, right?
Correct. Yeah. So like the term loosely means someone who is forcibly abducted by the state in a tactic of fear or intimidation. So political rivals would be disappeared. People who were suspected of supporting different, whether it's rebel leaders or whatever, political prisoners, they would all be disappeared and essentially never heard from again.
And they would take children too, kind of as punishment?
Yes. Yeah. So in El Salvador specifically, the armed forces would take the children of peasants as a way to punish them for helping the guerrillas.
Wow.
And so I have friends who were taken at gunpoint. The soldiers came to their little casita and pointed a gun at their mother and said, give me one of your children. And if you don't pick one, I'm taking all of them or something like that, or I'm killing all of you.
Oh, that's horrible.
Yeah. So that's the backdrop of the term. And so when we talk about the disappeared, I've come to really understand it's a term that's rooted in the families who are missing loved ones.
Right. Because you're one of the disappeared, but most of the time we never hear from them again, right?
Right. Yeah.
They're gone. They're probably dead, or they're renamed, or I don't know. Is it assumed most of them are dead?
Yeah. So since 1950, probably over 100,000 people have been forcibly disappeared throughout Central and South America.
Oh my gosh, that's a lot.
And the majority of those people are presumed dead, are gone, right?
Wow.
But I think this term disappeared or desaparecido has this cultural significance where your loved ones exist in this, as the president said, in this perpetual state of being neither dead nor alive, where you assume that they have been killed, but you don't know because there's no body, there's no evidence, there's no closure. And so it's this wound that just continues, that perpetuates.
Wow.
So it's hard to put into words what that means or what that feels like, but it is this sort of open wound that just continues.
Oh, yeah. Now, when your father found you at 16, did he know that you survived and were adopted, or did he have no idea what happened to his wife and his child in that raid? How much did he know?
He sort of knew. So he was kind of high up in the guerrilla organization. And so he knew, or he had heard that my mother had been killed.
Okay.
And he sort of knew that I'd been adopted, or he found that out later, I believe.
Okay. Word got out that they found a baby and that he figured it was you. And then.
Yeah, but he had no idea. So I disappeared. My birth mother disappeared. We disappeared together, right? Yeah. So we still don't know what happened to her. We don't really have any closure there either.
Oh.
So.
Yeah, you don't know for sure. Because they're saying that there was a raid and everyone died. But you don't really know that, huh?
And one of the interesting things was in the discovery packet, there's this photo of a woman laying face down in blood that my parents showed me.
Wow.
And, so 16 and they're saying, Pro Búsqueda believes this is your birth mother.
Whoa.
Oof. But then meeting with my family, they all looked at that photo and said, that's not her. She didn't look like that. So they don't really know. And like I said, we have to sort of assume that she was killed.
Wow.
But we don't know.
Wow. And were you considered disappeared when she took you to Honduras?
Well, so the disappearing event was the raid.
Okay, the raid. Okay.
So yeah, after the raid. And my uncle talks about this in the documentary film that I'm working on, where he said, I asked him about his experience because he took my mother and I to the bus station as we left the country.
Okay.
And he then heard a few months later that she had been killed. And he said, I don't know what happened to you. I thought you had disappeared, that maybe someone had killed you.
Okay.
So that's why that term disappeared is really rooted in the experience of the families that are looking for loved ones.
Yes.
From my perspective in the US, I was adopted and there was this sort of chain of custody that we can see. But from their perspective, it's a loved one who's gone missing and they have no idea what happened to them.
That ambiguous grief is so painful. And has it been wonderful being reconnected with your birth family? I'm sure there's been some bumps in the road, but are they all happy to know that you're here?
Yeah, it's been incredible. I think one of the fortunate things, even though it was extremely difficult to sort of take in that news at 16, I was also young enough to kind of enjoy it, that I ended up spending summer vacations, Christmas vacations, going down to Central America and being able to kind of just build a life and exist in this other country and get to know it and get to know my family more. So there was this freedom in that time period. I was young enough to form memories and enjoy the experience.
I bet you were kind of a celebrity in your family.
Yeah, in a way. And I think that was exciting and also challenging because you have the weight of this history and this legacy bearing down on you. When I came back home, I was like, ugh, I don't want to mess this up. There's that pressure in the back of your head. Like, I want to do something meaningful with the second chance that I've been given.
Yeah, for sure. Which is what you're doing. You have a documentary and a book, both in the works, right?
Correct. Yeah.
What's the timeline?
They're both kind of in the same place where I have a manuscript draft of the book and we're very close to finishing a rough cut of the film.
Okay.
And then we look for publication and distribution.
If anyone knows someone, right? Are you still looking for people?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
We're still
Okay.
looking.
If anyone has any connections, and definitely when either one comes out, make sure and let us know. So I'll make sure and publicize it so everyone can go read or watch your story. It's fascinating. You have so many layers and intersections and just complexities. Like I tell in the introduction, this podcast is about adoption's complexities. Like, good Lord, I bet your parents, this was definitely not on their radar, I'm going to guess, when they adopted you.
No, probably not.
Like, oh, they just thought you were so cute. Oh, this is going to be so great. Oh,
Yeah.
and how have they been with the reunion and, all this realization? How have they been with you, your adoptive parents?
They've been incredible, honestly. And I think if I'm sort of giving advice, I'd say what they did very well is they put my needs ahead of theirs, even when it was really difficult for them. And I've talked with my adoptive mother a lot over the years about these different moments, and she's told me how hard it was for her to let me go down in those early years. She's afraid that I'm not going to want to come back.
Sure.
Because as you say, I'm sort of a celebrity down there. I get to be free and carefree.
Sure.
And then I come back and she has to be sort of the disciplinarian.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Now I get back to school.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And that's not an easy position to be in.
No.
And I think she also had a hard time because there was this other mother there that I looked up to, but I could never meet, and wrestling with her emotions around that. Yeah. I did my best to be present and to sort of split the holidays, if you will. I was always here for like Thanksgiving and 4th of July, and kind of down there for the rest of the summer and Christmas. So I was kind of living in foot in both worlds, but I did my best to include them and make them know they're loved and that I wasn't turning my back on them. But I think they put my needs ahead of theirs consistently. And they gave me the opportunity to go down to Central America to get to know my family. They helped my biological sister, brother, cousins through school and helped them with different financial needs. They were incredibly supportive, and I just can't say enough nice things about how well it worked out. But I know it wasn't easy for them.
I'm sure not. Well, please give them my regards from another adoptive parent. I'm sure that was very difficult. And clearly you did not completely fall apart through the whole thing. So you kept your head on your shoulders, probably much to their credit. They supported you through this difficult journey and continue to, it sounds like. So that's great.
Yeah.
Last question. What advice do you have for hopeful adoptive parents who are looking at Central America or South America? Maybe there's not even many adoptions from there anymore, but it seems kind of fraught.
Yeah.
I know Guatemala has shut down. Are there other countries that still adopt from there?
I don't know. I'm not up on the latest sort of adoption news from Central America, but I don't know. I think that there are a few things. I think the one thing that I've learned from my experience is that there's sort of this idea, and it's sort of an old idea in adoption, that a child is sort of this blank slate, right? That you receive this child, and you raise them, and it's sort of this question of nurture versus nature. And what I've realized over the years is that it's both. Yeah. That yes, my adoptive parents gave me a wonderful, stable life, but at the same time, there are many aspects of who I am that come directly from the turmoil in Central America, from my family members, and that I'm both. And you can't ask me to choose. So
definitely,
one thing I've been doing more recently is sort of telling the adoption story, starting in Zacamil, where I was born, in the neighborhood where I was born. Okay. And part of that is to say, like, I existed before the adoption. There was a life. There was something.
Yeah, you were one.
Right.
You had a whole year. Yeah.
Yeah. And I might not have conscious memories of it, but that doesn't mean it didn't happen. Definitely. So I think just realizing adoptees, even though they may not have conscious memories of what they've been through, they have a history that is rooted in these other countries. Definitely. And helping them explore that isn't a rejection of you as a parent.
Yeah, it's our obligation to make sure you stay connected. Yeah, and that nature, as an adoptive parent, I did not understand how strong nature was. the nature versus nurture. Yeah, it's both, and both are super important. And nature is much stronger than I thought it was.
Maybe I can offer here. My adoptive father talked about it as my birthright to go back to Central America.
Absolutely. I agree.
And I really like that framing.
I agree.
So I think that was part of the reason why they let me go on so many trips. And that was such a wonderful experience. I have so many fond memories of growing up in Central America.
So that's amazing. Well, I'm so glad to know you, Nelson Roberto. You have an amazingly interesting story. I can't wait for your book and your documentary to come out so I can learn even more. And I appreciate you sharing and educating me and our audience about the disappeared children, disappeared people in Central and South America. And it's continuing on, right? It still is happening.
Yes, there's still forced disappearances to this day. It's still an issue. It's not quite the same as back during the 70s and 80s, but it's still an ongoing issue.
Yeah, something we all need to be more informed about, and so we can take action and support the people who are trying to make changes like yourself. So, well, our hearts are with you as you continue this amazing journey of life, and thank you again for sharing your story.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Is there a way people could get a hold of you?
Yeah, the easiest thing would probably be to just Google Nelson Roberto, but my website is nelsonroberto.com.
Okay.
I have links to the documentary film, which is called Identifying Nelson, Buscando a Roberto, links to my book, which is called Waking from Innocent Dreams. And also my adoptive mother wrote a book, Missing Mila, Finding Family, which is sort of the adoption story from her perspective. So
I'm going to go read
that was a wonderful book as well. And then I'm also working on story workshops with other adoptees.
Nice. Okay.
That might be something I'm launching publicly later in the year.
Okay. Keep an eye out for Nelson's writing workshops. That's really great. I think that's so important for adoptees to write their stories. So thank you for doing that service. All right. Well, go look up Nelson Roberto. And while you're there, look up Unraveling Adoption, unravelingadoption.com. And if you or anyone you know are an adoptive parent looking for help or guidance, I am a certified coach, certified through the Virginia Satir Global Network. And my passion is to help other adoptive parents find peace and be better parents for their adopted kids. Reach out to me through our website, unravelingadoption.com, or email me at beth@unravelingadoption.com to get it set up with coaching. And we all appreciate you listening and sharing this story with anyone you think that might need to hear it or might be interested in this amazing story of courage and facing the truth of who a person is. So, well, thank you again, Nelson, for being with us today. I really appreciate it, and I'm glad to know you.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. So Nelson and I want you all to stay safe.